We will be joined by Mr. Jean-Dominique SENARD, President of the Alliance Renault-Nissan-Mitsubishi. I hope the technology works.
Yes, it does. Hello to all of you, and thank you for your kind words. Obviously, I'm very happy to be able to speak to you today from France. Of course, I would have preferred to be present with you in Japan, but that will be for another time. I am therefore very happy to be there with you, and for two major reasons. On the one hand, because you are giving me the opportunity to share my convictions on a very key issue, which combines foresight, economic development, and reflection on the role of the company. Secondly, because since I joined the Renault Group, I am particularly proud to be working to deepen relations between France and Japan through the Renault-Nissan-Mitsubishi Alliance, which I have the honor to chair, an original partnership model with extraordinary potential. The subject I'm going to address now is at the heart of our discussions. By 2050, what role can and should companies play in contributing to a more sustainable world? I would like to defend the idea that the role of companies, which is key today in contributing to a more sustainable world, will be even more so in the future. This is simply because companies have most of the answers to the challenges facing humanity today. But this increasingly important role can only be played if companies adopt the values and behaviors of responsible capitalism that I am calling for. The role of business, which is key today in contributing to a more sustainable world, will be even more so in the future. That's my first conviction. Although every century has had its challenges, I don't think I will surprise anyone if I suggest that no era has seen as many vital challenges as ours. The program of this day of exchange revolves around these crucial questions that we must face. How to avoid climate disruption and warming that could make life on Earth untenable. How to preserve our biodiversity. How to feed 10 billion people in 2050 who will be concentrated in megalopolises in a few areas of countries, sub-Saharan Africa, for example, India, which will have more inhabitants than China in 2027, Egypt, Pakistan, Indonesia, and some others. How to live with elderly populations. In 2050, the world will have, for the first time, more people aged 65 or more than 24 years old. And the number of people over 80 will triple to more than 400 million. How to care for the populations, how to give them equitable access to education, how to provide them with well-distributed mobility, when today there are 600 vehicles per 1,000 inhabitants in North America, 500 in Europe and Japan, 200 in South America, 80 in Asia, of course excluding Japan and South Korea, and less than 50 in Africa. The answer to these challenges will come first and foremost from companies which have the power, the capacity for investment and innovation, the technical and technological know-how, but also the capacity to integrate people, to train them, to contribute to their development by giving meaning to their work. Businesses have never been so powerful. Thus, according to a study by the NGO Global Justice Now, the top 100 economic entities in the world were, in 2016, 31 states based on their revenues and 69 companies based on their sales. Finally, companies show their inventiveness and technological prowess every day. I am personally very admiring of those large laboratories that have been able to design and produce vaccines against COVID in a few months. We could also mention the mobility sector. The cars produced in the world today have never been so safe and clean. And the automotive industry is in the process of a twofold revolution that will take just a few years to complete. On the one hand, the transition from thermal vehicles to electric and hydrogen vehicles. On the other, the transformation of the automotive object, which will increasingly become software on wheels as part of a completely reinvented mobility value chain. At Renault Group, I am particularly proud of what our engineers are doing to tackle this future with enthusiasm and an exceptional capacity for innovation. I am also very fortunate to be able to base our development on the alliance with Nissan and Mitsubishi. You heard Gupta-san speak earlier about the work undertaken at Nissan, which is a magnificent company. Bringing together our three entities, the alliance is a unique model in the world with 450,000 employees and 10 brands. It is the only major player with 11 years of experience in electric vehicles and has helped make them accessible. To date, nearly 1 million electric vehicles have been sold by the Alliance. The Alliance will undoubtedly be a key player in creating a sustainable world. Like Renault, Nissan, and Mitsubishi, the companies will play an essential role, especially as they are eagerly awaited by public opinion around the world. International surveys show that people rely mainly on companies and the business world to provide solutions to the world's challenges. These very high expectations must not be disappointed. This implies that companies must be exemplary in terms of responsibility, ethics, and solidarity, with a concern for all stakeholders. My second conviction is clearly that the company will be able to assume this increasingly important role if it adopts the values and behaviors of responsible capitalism in the world. Today, there is much more talk about corporate social responsibility. This notion of responsibility owes its development to the emergence of certain values in society. For example, sensitivity to environmental or diversity issues. But the idea of a responsible company is also due to a reaction against the model that developed from the 70s and 80s around the idea theorized by the economist Milton Friedman, according to which the societal responsibility of the company is to increase its profits. This model, which is only interested in the remuneration of its shareholders, has shown two limits. First, in terms of social acceptability, the increase in inequalities has given rise to rejection and various popular or even populist reactions in different countries. The increase in inequality since the 80s is undeniable. The richest 1% have captured 27% of the growth in wealth and have benefited twice as much from the growth in income as the poorest 50%. Today, the 50 richest Americans are richer than the 165 million poorest Americans. This widening inequality has even overshadowed the medium-term benefits of capitalism, which has brought development to hundreds of millions of people around the world. Second, over the recent period, the increase in inequality is not the only limit shown by Friedmanian capitalism. The latter has shown that it is also less efficient Indeed, the very unbalanced sharing of value added, oriented solely to the benefit of shareholders, has been to the detriment of employees. Their purchasing power has in some cases resulted in a loss of turnover for companies, by the way, and for investors, less long-term growth. Faced with this model, the model of responsible company has emerged and has been built around different pillars. The raison d'être, or purpose pillar, which thinks of the company in terms of its social functions and the value it brings to all its stakeholders. In 2018, I had written a report with a former trade unionist, Keynote, which inspired a French law suggesting that companies could define their raison d'être, or purpose. Today, most large companies in France have defined or are in the process of defining their raison d'être, which marks real progress. The second pillar is a responsible company must integrate the notion of sustainability. It must be able to respond to climate and environmental issues, social cohesion, diversity, and now health issues. The third pillar is about the responsible company that must align the interests of the shareholder with its raison d'être. In this way, the company switches from a short-term logic focused on financial ratios alone to a long-term logic that evaluates what it produces in the broadest sense, its fruits, impacts, and positive and negative externalities. The last pillar of the responsible company is its capacity to respond to an increasingly political expectation, to work to defend the general interest, and I would even say the common good. This responsible enterprise has been progressing intellectually for several years. Little by little, it has influenced the legal and regulatory corpus of certain European countries like France. I also noted that the Japanese government, appointed last month, wished to define the division of a new capitalism, with the objective to reduce income disparity that has increased during the pandemic and generate a virtuous circle of growth and distribution. This is an interesting initiative that we will be watching with great attention from Europe. Thus, the vision of a new, more responsible capitalism is gaining ground. It also benefits from the support of some very important influencers. Larry Fink, head of Blackstone, the world's largest asset management fund, recently wrote that companies that fulfill their purpose and responsibilities to their stakeholders reap the long-term rewards. Those that ignore them stumble and fail. The idea of responsible capitalism has now gone far beyond the stage of being simply promoted in speeches. It is beginning to be integrated into practices. The next topic of this business summit will be dedicated to responsible finance. I will not elaborate on this point, except to note that the meteoric rise of green bonds. Their outstanding amount has increased from $100 billion in 2016 to $1,000 billion in 2020. In addition, in 2020, more than 3,000 investors with portfolios worth more than $100,000 billion have signed the United Nations Sixth Principle for Responsible Investment, the so-called PRA. Finally, various studies show that compliance with ESG criteria generates performance. Because the notion of responsibility is on the rise, is a responsible company now without rival and assured of growth? The answer is not so obvious, because it works with a long-term vision because it is committed to the environment, to diversity, because it invests in skills, because it integrates all stakeholders in its strategy, the responsible company imposes constraints and costs that are not imposed on the company that has only one goal: to increase its profits in order to pay its shareholders. One could say that in this perspective, the responsible company suffers from a competitive handicap. And yet, in my opinion, this handicap is largely counterbalanced by the formidable advantage it enjoys. It gives meaning. And this meaning is not simply a qualitative bonus. It is a direct performance lever at all levels. A responsible company that gives meaning thus benefits from a more attractive employer brand, which enables it to recruit the best employees and retain them more easily. It also benefits from a stronger commercial brand. For an equivalent product, meaningful social and environmental initiatives sway customers' choices. And finally, it can rely on a more robust financial brand, getting access to financing facilities. For example, the exponential development of SRI funds illustrates that. In short, the meaning that a company can create around its social responsibility, expressed through its purpose, is indeed the strongest vector of its competitiveness. As a conclusion, I would like to defend the vision that the future belongs to those companies that prove that responsibility does not undermine, but on the contrary, strengthens competitiveness. And in this way, responsible companies, the only ones capable of overcoming the classic vein of position, capital versus labor, shareholders versus stakeholders, short-term versus long-term, will show that they are sine qua non condition for building a more sustainable world. Faced with immense challenges, environmental, demographic, health, food, educational, the answers will come above all from companies that can combine innovation potential, technical mastery, firepower, and responsibility. They will not succeed alone, but together with other players. And it is from innovative cooperation between companies, states, local authorities, and super-straight institutional, and the solution from the major challenges of our future will emerge in the joint search for the common good, and by understanding the necessary transformations in the light of their social, economic, territorial, and more broadly, human consequences. Despite the many crises we face on a daily basis, or perhaps precisely because of these crises, I am pleased to note that the notion of responsible enterprise is making progress every day. This movement is encouraged by the younger generations, whose studies show that they are more than their elders in search of meaning, which can only be satisfied through the notion of responsibility and raison d'être. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention. I really have appreciated to be there with you. Thank you so much. Arigato gozaimasu.
Thank you, Mr. Senard, and thank you for laying out the framework for responsible companies. And you mentioned responsible finance, which is a great segue to our next session, the topic of which is financing the future. So